Thank you very much for inviting me to do a little gardening talk, a little gardening workshop for Wexford Libraries. I'm absolutely delighted to do that. So we're here at a polytunnel, and we'll go through a whole load of different aspects of gardening, about soil, about does gardening make you happy? We do a little bit about propagation, a tiny bit of composting, and we'll even show you an amazing worm bin later on. But gardening has really become, there's been a massive uptake in gardening since lockdowns and since people are more at home. And isn't it one of the best ways, the most wonderful ways of reconnecting with nature and to feel you have a purpose? And what I can't get over every single year, seeing a seed germinate or a potato pop up, it's those miracles which are much, much bigger than what nature, what normal life is about. We are not living in this materialistic world where everything is just biochemical processes. There is life forces, there is magic in the world, and that's the great thing of getting back a little bit. And we have the time now, most of us, to do that, and it's a wonderful thing to see. Now, it's not the plants that it starts off with. Soil is the beginning of our life. Soil is actually the beginning and end of all life forms. This little bit of, the Americans call it dirt. Can you imagine that? That should be banned, that word, dirt. Dirt is what's behind your fridge, really. But this is the most precious substance on earth. Without the top 12 inches of topsoil, there would be no life on earth. There would be no trees, no plants, no people, no animals. There would be a few lichens, mosses growing on rock. That's about all. So we have neglected the soil in a very, very scary way over the last 60 years especially. Since industrial farming has become mainstream, we have abandoned the care for the soil. We no longer look after it, and it's devastating. The effects are absolutely devastating. We've lost at least a quarter of the global land area through degradation. Washed away, compacted. We can no longer grow food on 25% of the global arable land area. Scary. Every year we lose another billions and billions of tons of topsoil. And if it continues like that, the United Nations World Health Organization, they reckon we have 60 harvests left. And that is scary. That is more scary than global warming, climate change. So we should become more soil warriors than climate change activists. Now I might get a few angry comments in it, but I'll explain to you why. Soil contains carbon, and actually that compost that you see here is 50% carbon. And that should be in the soil. Over the last 60 years, we have robbed the carbon from the soil. We have mined the carbon to grow crops, and it's now in the atmosphere. The carbon can be measured by the organic matter content of a soil. So a good average soil has 5% organic matter. A very good garden soil in a walled garden could have 10% organic matter. Organic matter, I should have said what it is everything that is and was alive. So it's the living part of the soil. The other 90% or 95% is the mineral matter of the soil, the ground up rock. But the life force, the life bringer is the organic matter in the soil, and we have robbed it. There are some soils now, especially down your area in Wexford, where the organic matter content has declined to maybe 2 or 3%. And that's caused by continuous farming, ploughing the land, growing the same monoculture every single year. There's areas where there's barley or oats or wheat grown every single year with no inputs of organic matter. So back to my climate change story. All we need to do is make our soils fertile again, bring the organic matter into the soil. We can do that with compost making, with using farmyard manure, and we could have indefinite growth of food, and we take the carbon out of the atmosphere. So please listen, some of the climate change warriors. Soil degradation has never been given enough credit as a contributor to climate change. Okay, so that's our soil. Now, to get your soil ready, we'll do some practical aspects now. So seed sowing is probably the most exciting spring gardening activity. You sow all these little seeds, I sow them into these modular trays, and then they grow to about that tall, and then they're planted out directly from these modular trays out into the garden, and that's when they're ready. Do you see that lovely firm root? No soil falls off it again. Slightly on the dry side, but still that kale is perfect. Let's have a look at the beetroot. So that one is also ready to plant. It could safely be in the tray for another week or so, and then it gets stressed. These are my favorite trays. They are called quick pots, 77 cells. They come out very easily, big with a push, as you saw earlier. Just push it and they slide out. They cost maybe at least €6 or €6.50, but I have trays that lasted for probably 20 years now without breaking. The cheaper ones, and you get cheaper multi-trays, you can get them for €1, but they break your heart and your fingers, so they're not really suitable at all. So as I said, most vegetables I would sow into these trays and plant them out at that stage. So that's maybe about 80% of all vegetables and salads I would do that with. So I'll show you how to fill them. You overfill the trays, and that's where many people go wrong actually. What they do is they compact. They would firm the compost in like that. There's no need for that, okay? So ignore what I've just done, and you overfill it, and then you have a couple of bangs, 1-2 bangs, and rub it off. Now I totally forgot to say about the compost. Do you see how wonderful this compost is? And it's really the best. So it's called KKS Classman, and it's available from Fruit Hill Farm or agents throughout the country. Don't even attempt to use the multi-purpose potting compost with the big lumps of it. You get 100% success with them all the time. So you make your whole, you fill it 2 bashes and then scrape it away, and then 2 fingernails depth as a general rule for nearly everything. And the exception is lettuce. Lettuce needs a tiny indentation of it. Lettuce needs light to germinate, but everything else goes fingernails depth. Now you will ask me why do you multi-seed? So I sow coriander now. Coriander is a short-lived plant, so I'll sow it regularly. Probably as a hobby gardener you get away with once a month, but on a bigger scale you'd sow them every week, a small quantity. I pour them onto a piece of paper, and with a pencil I scrape in 5 seeds per cell. Doesn't matter if it's 7, if it's more, but at least 5. And they're big seeds, aren't they? You could actually use your hand as well with the coriander. Okay, now you will ask, then do you split them up? Do you break them up, the modules, before planting them? And no is the answer. You take that whole module out and plant the 5 coriander plants in the one station. And that confuses people, but you get 5 times the amount of yield from it. So that's coriander, 5 seeds per cell. Onion ishikura, that's actually not an onion. That's the best scallion that you have. You sow 10 seeds per cell. So again, 10 seeds into each hole. Oriental salad mix like mibuna, salad rocket, pak choy, etc., or tatsoi. I sow 5 or 6 seeds per cell. So I think you get the idea. So I have the whole tray sown with a whole range of different seeds. Then all I do is put compost on top of it again and level it up. Now the most important bit is labels, and the best marker is a pencil because you can rub it off. Any water resistant marker or anything, it just washes off the label instantly. So the date is really important. Today is the 2nd of April, and it's coriander filtro. Put it in so that each row is labelled. If they haven't germinated within 2 weeks, you know straight away there was something wrong. They were drying out or something like that, and you can ignore them. Then they go, at this time of the year, you can just move them into a polytunnel or into a greenhouse. You mightn't need a heating mat for it. If you sow them earlier, you might have to get a heating mat, which we'll show you now. Okay, so that's as simple as that. And then guess how long that took? 4 weeks, I guess. From sowing to actually 22nd of February. So actually it's 5 weeks. So it's a little bit longer. It's a little bit longer early on. So it's 5 weeks. So 4 to 5 weeks from seed to planting out. That's great. I show you now how to sow seeds directly into the ground. Because I forgot to tell you. Why I didn't. I said 80% of all the seeds are sown into modular trays, but there's a few that you don't. And 2 that can never ever be sown into the modular trays are carrots and parsnips. You simply cannot do that. If you sow carrots and parsnips in there, the root will reach the bottom and then it starts to spiral round. And the carrot and the parsnip will never ever lose that habit of spiraling. So your carrots after 6 months will only be that tall and knobbly and stringy and absolute nuisance. So if you go to a garden centre, they try and sell you carrots grown in modules. You should give out. Tell them Klaus was telling you not to do that anymore, because they know fairly well that it just wouldn't work. Okay, so carrots need to be sown directly into the ground, and so do parsnips. Now, there are many other plants that can be sown directly into the ground. They can be sown into modular trays or directly into the soil. Beetroot, for example. We do both. We sow beetroot into the ground and we sow some into modules, depending on your liking. So we'll have a quick look now at the bed, how to prepare a seed bed and how to sow seeds into the ground directly. Okay? Great. So we'll prepare a little patch of ground, hoe it, rake it, and then sow seeds. But I have to introduce you to my favorite tools, the 3 favorite tools that I have in gardening. That's the oscillating hoe or swivel hoe. And you go like this. So it makes gardening as easy as anything. You can even loosen it a little bit if needs be, or just hoe the weeds off. So I go over that bed, making sure there's no more weeds. And then the second most important tool, and that actually doesn't belong to me, that belongs to a friend of mine, my dream, a copper rake. Probably the most amazing tool ever. Get yourself a good rake. They're nearly impossible to find good rakes. So the angle here is important, etc. So try and get it as level as possible. That's where I would actually waste time. I'd be quite efficient generally, but I love a nice seed bed. I think it makes all the difference if your seed bed is nice and level. Now these pipes are irrigation pipes. They're a bit of a nuisance, isn't it, when you make up a bed, but that's just how they are. So that's level enough. Okay, so we've just done the seed sowing in modular trays, and now I'm showing you how to sow seeds directly into the ground. Another one of my favorite tools, the onion hoe or draw hoe. After we raked it, we make a little furrow like that. And that's perfect, isn't it? Such an easy job, rather than having to bend down and do it like that. So you keep going with the rows, but I just show you a couple there. And then you sow the seeds in. I just have radishes here in my pocket, and later I show you how radishes and carrots are sown together. But I just do the radishes here and aim for about that distance, and then always imagine how big you want your final vegetable to be. And don't worry if they're too thick in some areas, or so it's that movement, then they come out one by one. You can always thin them out if you find they're too clustered. I'll reach the third one, yeah. So simple, isn't it? And then with a rake, I close. If without the pipes, I would go like this. And then on the other side, I would go like that. But the rake, unfortunately, is a problem. Oh, those pipes. And tap it in. And then put labels at the end so you know exactly where you are. And that's it. Water them in. And you have, within a week or so, you'll have radishes germinating. And literally in 4 weeks' time, you have radishes ready to harvest. And I'll just pick one that we prepared earlier. That's exactly the same as I sowed here. It's a radish mix. And unfortunately, people in Ireland do not like radishes. They, for some reason, never tasted them even. The best is cut them in half, sprinkle salt on it, leave it to absorb for 5 minutes, and then a blob of butter on it. Really healthy stuff. And it's the nicest thing ever. And don't forget to eat soil. Soil contains serotonin. The University of Bristol and Reading, they found that there is serotonin in soil-living bacteria, and eating small quantities of soil is really healthy. There's actually a scientific name for soil eaters, and that's geophagus. So you could be a geophage if you eat small quantities of soil. The crunch of a freshly harvested radish. It must be my German nature, because in Germany every salad contains radish, but we haven't convinced you yet, so you should though. Try it with children. It's the quickest, easiest crop to grow. I'll show you over there now. If you look closely, that's actually a row of carrots. So as I did over there, I made the furrow and we sowed carrots into it. But then we sprinkled radish seeds in it. Yeah? And the radish seeds are just indicators, or we get a second crop. So from the others that you see over there, we just pulled the radishes to just this morning from it. So here, see, you have 2 crops for the price of 1. Excellent. So I need to give a big plug to a very dear friend of mine, Joy Larkham. She is the best garden writer, the best gardener living. She's in her 80s and she was an inspiration to so many gardeners over the years. She wrote amazing books like Oriental Vegetables, The Creative Vegetable Garden, and loads more. Grow Your Own. Joy Larkham is the name. But what I'm saying it for is she is responsible for the introduction of all those Asian salads. If you look at all these Mitsuna, Red Frills, Rocket, etc. She traveled in the 90s to all the Asian countries to find these wonderful, wonderful plants. And they love the Irish winter. There's no other plant that loves the Irish winter. And that's a tough one, isn't it? The Irish winter with the wind and the rain. They are hardy to minus 10 degrees. So this is Mitsuna. Minus 10 degrees wouldn't knock them down. They are all in the mustard family, the brassica family. So they're quite spicy as they grow. And for anybody starting even a little business in selling vegetables or making a little bit of pocket money from a tunnel, these are the crops to grow. So you can sell these mixed salad bags at 150 grams for 2 or 3 euros on a regular supply. And what she always said is the cut and come again technique. Cut and come again technique. So you hold the whole plant together, do you see that, like that? And then you cut about 5 centimeters above the growth point and you cut it. Put that into a box and you keep doing 1 row at a time. So if you have 4 rows, you harvest 1 row 1 week, the second row the following week. By the time you're back on them, they have grown again to the same height. So they're forever giving. Now, while I said they love the Irish summer, they love the Irish winter, they hate the Irish summer. They go straight to seed, they bolt, they don't get much at all. You get 1 or 2 cuts instead of 7 or 8 cuts if you grow them in wintertime. And they also have a terrible problem in summertime in Ireland, and that's the flea beetle. So if you ever grown them, rocket especially, you see it quickly, and tiny little shot holes in it, that's flea beetle damage. Now, at this time, there's none of them around, so the little holes you get is probably from slugs. So we have Mitsuna, red frills mustard, Sima di Rapa, mustard giant red, red Mitsuna. We have Mibuna, salad rocket, and wild rocket behind there. So there's a big wide range of these wonderful crops. Absolutely thrilled to have them. And more new ones are being bred as we speak. Now, you've seen me harvesting those. And that's a real important thing to learn, lesson to learn. If I harvest a lettuce at sunrise, or salads like that, at sunrise, at 6 o'clock in the morning now, harvest them, put them in bags and put them in the fridge. They will keep for 7, 8 days, 10 days even, as fresh as anything. Now it's a beautiful sunny hot day here, and I harvested them at 2 o'clock. They're already wilted. They will not last a day, even if I try and do everything from it. So the lesson is the earth breathes in at night. So there's a big inhaling at night. And you can see it in nature. Everything goes reabsorbed down into the roots. And at the back of the leaves of plants, there are little mouths, and they're called stomata. And they open when the sun shines, and moisture is going out of it. So moisture is evaporating as soon as the sun shines onto a plant leaf. So during the day, there's one slow breathing out of plants back up into the atmosphere. And you can see it in the morning dew rising sometimes over fields. It's a beautiful sight. So these lettuces or mitsuna or salads, they will not last at all. So if you do have salads, try it once, get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, harvest them, and you'll find they're as fresh as anything. So nothing to do with preservatives or sprays that you can give your plants, just the time of harvesting. Over there, I'll just walk over there. So on the way, I'd love to point out our glass-fronted wormery. That's just an educational tool. So what we did here is we put all different types of layers in, of greens, lettuce leaves, compost, more grass mowings here, sand, manure with worms in it, wood chip. We even have some paper somewhere and cardboard, and we layered it. It's really meant to show how worms actually mix the soil. And there's a camera there, so every day we take a photo. So if it works, hopefully it'll work. We can show you maybe a glimpse of that, or we might post it on YouTube as well. Worms, there's different types of worms. There's the earthworms. They are the soil dwellers, the big lumbricus terrestris they're called. And they are free spirits, they go into the soil. And then there is the compost worms, these ones. And they are in manure piles and in your compost. And they're quite happy to actually live in the one spot only. So there's other types of worms for other different soil conditions and all that. Worms are under threat, which is scary, because we know about loss of biodiversity, we know about loss of bees, loss of insects, but who do you hear talking about loss of worms? And worms are in serious decline because our farming practices have changed. Now farmers, many farmers, they would use wormers for their sheep and cattle. They're routinely dosed with a wormer, so their manure comes out, worms eat it and die. Also, worms need to be fed. That means we need to incorporate stuff into the soil. We need to bring compost, manure back into the soil. We can't just keep taking. So we harvest our lettuce, we harvest our crops, but we need to give something back to the soil. And that has to be in an organic form. That cannot be in a dead form like artificial fertilizers, because an artificial fertilizer, the NPK pellets, they only feed the plants. They only make your plants grow big, and they bypass the soil. The soil is of no benefit. It doesn't do anything good whatsoever to your soil. So that's the two biggest pains in our industrial farming is big monocultures and the use of artificial fertilizers that substitute Good old farmyard manure. Great, I just wanted to show you something here. Do you see all the mounds? We actually just covered the potatoes. Do you see that? There's potatoes under there, and we cover them with soil, and that's for frost protection. There's next 2 days or so they forecast severe frost, and that would kill down all the seed potatoes and will knock them back. They would regrow again, but you lose at least 4 weeks. So soil insulation, that's what it is, covering them. Next to it, we didn't. The potatoes were too big already, so we covered them with fleece. Now these are in a tunnel, okay? So a polytunnel has no frost protection. If it's -2 outside, it'll be -1 inside. Not much better than outside, so you still have to worry about frost. Now here, it doesn't look like much yet. This is one of my 2 favorite plants. My 2 favorite plants are Jerusalem artichokes and yacon. And I actually got a scholarship about 3 years ago, and I traveled the whole world around to look for crops that have potential to be grown in Ireland as commercial crops. And these 2 are the ones that I've identified. So there was a Nuffield scholarship, which was a wonderful experience, on the road for 10 weeks. So that's yacon. It has 2 types of tubers. One's knobbly tuber, which we planted in here, and that produces a shoot. Now that will become that tall and that bushy, soft, downy, tropical looking leaves. And the edible part is that, the tubers. And they are, I promise you, within 2-3 years, or within a year, everybody will have heard of yacon. It's a sweetener. It's sweet, but it doesn't have sugars in it. The carbohydrates are in the form of fructooligosaccharides, whatever that means, but they don't put any weight on, okay? They encourage all your microorganisms, microbes in your stomach. So a sweetener where you lose weight with, like, that's totally no-brainer, isn't it? And they taste delicious. So when I went to Peru, they're actually for sale in markets as a fruit. They're in the fruit section rather than in the vegetable section. So when you bite in it, and you have to actually peel it, there's something in the skin that you shouldn't eat, but I think I'll survive a bit. They are pure sweet, between a melon and pear, kind of, that sort of taste and texture. So that's yacon. Hard to get plants off. Very difficult to get plants off, but we will try and propagate them. We actually will have half the tunnel here full of yacon plants. So if anybody will see it, it's going to be like a jungle. Very good. So the next thing, I might show you the herb garden outside, and we'll identify a few herbs. Okay? So we're outside now, and I just want to show you a few herbs. You have the common ones, chives. Chives is a great one. You can divide it now. You could dig that clump out, pull it apart, and you could make 15 different new plants and replant them. So that's by division. When you do that, the best is to cut the leaves off when you divide them. But here is a very special plant. Can you see the little water droplets there? And I actually like the Latin names of plants. Some people think it's silly to use Latin, but Latin can be good fun. This one is called Alchemilla mollis, the little alchemist. And you've probably heard of the alchemists who tried to make gold out of base metals. And they used the dewdrops of that highly energized, potentized lady's mantle plant. So imagine these rays of the sun, the energy of this water reacting with this special herb, the lady's mantle it's called. So if you ever feel a little bit tired after all your gardening activity, you should try and get one of these dewdrops and suck it up, and you'll be jumping up and down in no time. So that's the Alchemilla mollis. Over there we have comfrey. Comfrey is used by a lot of organic gardeners, and you make a liquid feed out of it. So you cut the leaves when they're about that tall, just before they flower, and you steep them in a barrel of water for a month or 6 weeks, and then you take one diluted 1/10, and you water all the plants that need potassium. So that is a high potassium feed. That variety actually is called Bocking 14. And it was bred for its highest potassium content. And it actually doesn't produce viable seeds, so it doesn't spread around in your garden in case you're worried about it. It stays where it is. To propagate that, you could dig it up and cut little root sections. So root cuttings, you take little slips of the root and you plant them, pot them on or stick them directly into the soil, and you have a new comfrey Bocking 14 plant. Here, this one looks like sorrel. Yeah, very refreshing. If you're ever thirsty and can't get some water, if you're in the garden, you can eat your sorrel. And here a little plant that looks like a weed. Do you see that? That's evening primrose. Another little, lovely little herb. No, it's not little. It grows to about a meter tall. Lovely yellow flowers. But as a young plant, it can be used as a salad or like a spinach. So that's evening primrose. I apologize, everything looks a bit dead and it needs to be weeded and ruffled and all. But a lot of plants are what they call herbaceous perennials. A herbaceous perennial is actually a plant that dies back in wintertime and comes up again around now, this time in spring. And it lives for many years. Over there we have another interesting one, I show you. You can just see it popping up and it probably grows to that height. That looks like lovage to me. Lovage. L-O-V-A-G-E. It is. It has a very strong celery-like flavor. It's the easiest perennial herb stroke vegetable that you can grow of all times because it just lasts for years and years and it gets bigger and thicker and it's lovely in soup and no maintenance like what you'd have with celery. You don't have to keep sowing it at any stage. So another herbaceous perennial, it dies back in wintertime and it comes, and if you'd see that in 2 months, it'll be that tall. It's always a miracle to me that this plant isn't grown in any garden. It looks absolutely beautiful. It can be shaped even nicer than a box tree. And it's an evergreen, good hiding place for insects. And it's probably worth about €5,000. If you pick leaves like that, put them in a cardboard box and sell them to a supermarket, you'd get 150 out of it. So you probably know what I'm talking about. It's the bay leaves, which are wonderful food. So for most dishes, stews or whatever, put a few bay leaves into it. And there you are. So no need to buy any more bay leaves ever again. Grow your own. Let's have a look at some fruit trees. Great, so that's an example of a small mini orchard. There's only 8 fruit trees in it, measuring probably 6 meters by 15 meters, a small little area. The best investment is to buy an apple tree. If you buy an apple tree, it might cost you 12 to 25 euros, and every single year you'd get starting from 50 to 100 to 200, 300 apples per tree. So I buy organic apples generally and they cost 50 cents each. So you can do the sums, how much money you would save for how much money. So if anybody has money spare, don't put it in the bank, plant an orchard, plant some apple trees. So here we have apple trees here on the left and you see full of lichen. That's the sign of good air quality. So we're here in Leitrim. There's no air pollution, luckily yet, and they're not harmful. So don't be too fussy. Some people might think, oh my God, I need to pull all that off. There's no need for it. It's simply a sign of good air quality. So these are apples, and here we have a cherry tree. Do you see the buds? They're nearly about to burst open. These are fruiting buds, so there will be flowers. And you can see, if you look closely here, you have these buds are actually the buds that will produce a shoot next year. And the big round ones are producing a flower and a cherry, hopefully. Now, I think it's nearly impossible to get cherries in Ireland. I give up. I gave up completely in growing cherries because they just get eaten by birds before it. So I've seen one tree that actually was covered with a big netting just to keep the birds away. That's the only way you get them. So while they would grow on their own, the birds will have them exactly the day before you intend to get them. Stick with apples if you want reliable fruit. And apples Okay, let's start with apples. First of all, choose the right varieties. Choose a variety that you don't know the name of. That's the most important bit. The varieties that you know the names of are Golden Delicious, Cox Orange Pippin, Gala, and Pink Lady. They cannot be grown in Ireland, so forget about them, okay? Don't. And if you planted them, pull them out maybe and get rid of them. Grow varieties that are suitable to the Irish climate. And you down in Wexford, you're very lucky. You have English's Fruit Nursery in Enniscorthy, and they have a wonderful selection of apple trees. And on top of that, Paddy English, it's a great name, isn't it? Is a mine of information, and he'll let you know which is the best variety to grow. Rootstock. You heard the word rootstock. Apples are grafted. So if you look at the base, there's a root stock, maybe M9, maybe M26, and the variety is grafted onto it. And that's what makes the tree. Okay, so the rootstock determines the height of the tree. If you have a small, tiny garden, grow a small rootstock like the M9. The apple trees need to be staked all the time, but they only grow to about 12 feet. If you have a bigger garden, I would grow the M26 rootstock, which these ones are. These make bigger, better trees, sturdier trees, longer lived trees, but they might grow too big for a normal garden. And pruning is not the solution. If you think, oh, my tree is too big, I need to butcher it down, and that's all it is, butchering it down. They react, they compensate, and they bring water shoots back up again. So pruning to reduce a tree, heavy pruning to reduce a tree is not the answer. It's the rootstock, what to decide on. Sometimes what you find is when you plant a new tree and maybe you've great soil, they grow too much into the upright, too vigorous. And that applies to all flowers and fruits, etc. If a plant grows upright, it does not produce flowers. It just keeps growing. If a plant grows more in the horizontal, flowers will be initiated, the hormones change, and you get less vigorous growth, but more flowers. So what you could do if your branches are upright, you can bend them down a little bit. And you can hold that down with a string and a stone, or you can tie it around there. Or if you have two main branches growing upright like that, you could wedge something, a piece of timber in between with some rubber so not to hurt it. So bringing a plant into the horizontal is actually the solution. There is nothing more beautiful than an orchard in mid-April, late April, when the flowers are out. So they're soon flowering, could be another 2 or 3 weeks before the flowers come out. And absolutely gorgeous. There's no nicer sight for that. Now, my favorite varieties of apples, definitely Katya or Katie is on top. That's an early variety, very resistant to the two main problems of apples, scab and canker. So Katya, an early one, it's not a keeper, okay? You just have to eat 100 apples in a few weeks or give them away. Discovery, equally good, a wonderful flavour, not as resistant as Katya, but still really good, also an early variety. I think the taste of apples has changed. We now have these awful sweet ones. They're really disgusting, like Pink Lady. You may as well eat sugar, really, rather than an apple. I love the real apples, the sour ones, the ones that have a real crunch, where you have an experience when you bite in. And these are Charles Ross, but better even James Grieve, an old Scottish variety of apples. Absolutely gorgeous. Topaz is a new variety from the Czech Republic, very resistant to scab and canker, bred for organic production. So there's a whole range of apples, but please do avoid Golden Delicious, Cox and Pink Lady at all times. So apples are the reliable ones. Pears, we can't grow pears up here where we are in Leitrim, but you in Wexford, you could grow pears easily outside, I'd imagine. I need to grow them against a south-facing wall and train them against it, and we can get brilliant pears that way. Plums, I love plums, and I love the little Mirabella plums, but unfortunately, I get them probably 1 in every 3 or 4 years that I get a reasonable yield. So it's not a big reliable one either. Thank you very much for watching this gardening talk, and I hope you enjoyed it and learned a little bit. The beauty about gardening is that you learn every day is something new, either from nature or from somebody else. There's hardly a day gone past in my 30 years of gardening where I haven't learned something new. And sometimes I wish I would have known that a lot earlier. So hopefully we'll meet in person sometime, and in the meantime, enjoy your garden. Goodbye.